She came out of the storm like a ghost. On a forgotten mountain road, in the middle of a freezing night, a German shepherd stumbled into the headlights of a lone pickup truck. She was soaked to the bone, shaking so hard she could barely stand. No collar, no leash, no owner in sight. And then, without barking, without hesitation, she did something no one expected. She leapt straight into a U.S. Marine's arms, not to attack, not to beg for food, but to plead, because hidden in a dark roadside culvert just yards away were 4 newborn puppies she refused to abandon. What the Marine didn't know yet was that this dog wasn't just abandoned. She was erased. Her military records were locked. Her past had been buried. And before the night was over, someone else would come looking for her, willing to break in, spill blood, and steal her puppies to make sure she disappeared forever. This is the story of the dog who chose a man, the Marine who chose to stay, and the promise neither of them would ever break. No one gets left behind. The rain didn't fall so much as it attacked. It came down in hard sheets that slapped the windshield and turned the narrow mountain road into a ribbon of black glass. Wind shoved at the pickup like a living thing, and every time Ethan Cole's wipers swept across the glass, they squealed in protest, as if even the truck wanted to quit and turn back. Somewhere up in the dark, trees creaked and bowed under the weight of water, and thunder rolled across the ridges with the heavy, familiar sound of distant artillery. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel anyway. He'd driven through worse places than West Virginia back roads. Kandahar had taught him how to keep moving when the world was trying to break you. But this kind of storm had its own cruelty. It wasn't bullets you could hear coming. It was the quiet, sneaky way the road disappeared underwater, and the fog settled low, swallowing your headlights before they could reach the next curve. He was bone-tired. 12 hours on a broken line out near the river, stringing cable and climbing poles in wind that wanted to peel you off the rungs. Lineman work wasn't the core, but it had the same edge to it. You didn't get careless. You didn't get soft. One wrong move and you paid for it. Ethan exhaled slowly and tried not to think about why he'd taken this route home instead of the highway. Habit, maybe? Or the fact that the wide-open road made his chest feel too empty lately. The mountain road, with its sharp turns and close trees, forced his mind to stay right where his tires were. The radio crackled and then went dead. No signal. The screen on his phone glowed uselessly. Just him, the truck, the storm, and the miles between Charleston and his little trailer tucked near the edge of the forest. He rounded a bend and eased off the gas when the fog thickened into something almost solid. The headlights cut a tunnel through it. Water streamed down the road in thin rivers. Somewhere to his left, a drop-off fell away into black nothing. He slowed again, more out of instinct than fear. And then he saw it. A shape at the shoulder of the road, low and hunched, barely more than a shadow in the rain. For half a second his mind tried to label it as a fallen branch or a torn tarp, something the storm had thrown into the ditch. Then it moved. Ethan's foot hovered over the brake. The shape lifted its head, and 2 amber points flashed in the beams, eyes catching light the way a deer's would. But it wasn't a deer. It stepped into the edge of the headlights, and Ethan's stomach tightened. A German shepherd. Female. Soaked through, coat plastered to her ribs. She looked too thin, the kind of thin that made you feel guilty just for having a full meal in your stomach. Mud caked her legs. Dark streaks, blood or grime or both, matted the fur along her flank. Ethan pulled the truck onto the shoulder and put it in park. The rain hammered the roof. For a moment he sat there, staring, trying to decide what kind of danger he might be stepping into. Stray dogs could be unpredictable, wild, afraid. And out here, in this weather, anything that desperate could bite first and ask questions later. But the dog didn't run. She didn't bark, didn't snarl. She just stood there in the downpour, trembling so hard her whole body seemed to shake, and looked straight at him like she'd been waiting. Ethan opened the door and stepped out, and the cold hit him like a slap. Rain punched through his jacket within seconds. His boots sank into wet gravel. He kept his hands low and his voice even, the way you talk to a frightened animal or a nervous recruit. "Hey," he called over the storm. "Hey, girl, easy." The German Shepherd took one step toward him, then another. Her gait was uneven, and she favored one leg. She stopped close enough that Ethan could see details he hadn't caught from the cab. A raw patch where a collar had rubbed too long, scars that didn't look like a normal dog fight, and a thin, pale line along her muzzle that suggested old injuries that had healed the hard way. Her eyes were wide and alert, but what he saw in them wasn't rage. It wasn't fear, either. It was something sharper. Something like decision. Ethan crouched, keeping his weight back. "You lost, sweetheart?" he murmured. "You out here all by yourself?" The dog's chest heaved. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts that fogged in the cold. She swayed once, as if the ground tilted beneath her. Then she moved. Not away. Toward him. She staggered forward and pressed her full weight into his chest, front paws slipping on his wet jacket. Ethan caught her automatically, arms coming up, bracing her against him. For a heartbeat, he thought she might snap at his throat, might turn wild in the closeness. Instead, she clung. Her body shook like she was freezing from the inside out. Ethan felt the rapid thump of her heart against his ribs. She tucked her head against his shoulder, and there was something about that gesture, so human in its need, that made his throat tighten. It wasn't an attack. It was a plea. "Okay," Ethan whispered, rain running down his face like tears he hadn't asked for. "Okay, I got you." The dog's ears twitched. She made a sound that was barely a whine, almost swallowed by the storm, but it carried a kind of urgency that lifted the hair along Ethan's arms. Then he heard it. A faint, thin sound cutting through the rain. Not from her, from somewhere down the slope, closer to the ditch. Ethan froze, listening. Another soft cry followed, higher, weaker, like a squeak that didn't have enough strength behind it. His eyes swept the roadside. The storm blurred everything. The dog lifted her head slowly and turned toward the sound, and Ethan saw it then, clear as if she'd spoken words. The way her gaze locked on a spot near a concrete culvert where water was pouring out like a small waterfall. "Oh no," Ethan breathed. The German Shepherd tried to move, but her legs buckled. Ethan steadied her and reached back into the cab for his flashlight. The beam cut through the rain in a pale cone, bouncing off wet leaves and slick stone as he aimed it toward the culvert. The ditch dropped down sharply. Water rushed along the bottom, brown with mud. The culvert mouth yawned open like a dark throat under the road. And tucked just inside, half hidden behind a piece of broken plastic and soaked rags, was a small nest of movement. 4 tiny bodies, no bigger than Ethan's hands, squirming weakly in the cold. Their eyes were sealed shut. Their fur was flat against them. One of them lifted its head and let out a cry so small it was almost nothing, and still it hit Ethan like a punch. He slid down the embankment on his backside, boots digging for purchase. The rain made the grass slick as oil. The flashlight beam shook in his hand as he leaned in close. "Jesus," he whispered. The puppies were shivering. Their bodies trembled in frantic little pulses, as if they were trying to generate heat by will alone. Ethan reached out and touched one gently with the back of his fingers. The pup felt cold, and in that instant his marine training and his human panic collided. He scrambled for a plan. No blanket, no dry box, just the clothes on his back and a storm that didn't care. Above him, the mother dog let out a broken, urgent sound and tried again to rise. Ethan glanced up, and her eyes met his in the beam, steady, fierce, and terrified in the same breath. "Don't leave them." He couldn't explain why that thought came so clear. It wasn't like the dog had spoken. But he knew. He'd seen that look in men on the battlefield, the ones who didn't ask for comfort, the ones who only asked for one thing. "Don't leave my people behind." Ethan yanked his jacket off, the cold instantly biting deeper, and draped it over the puppies as carefully as if they were glass. He scooped them one by one into the fold, bringing them close to his body to share what warmth he had. Their tiny cries quieted a fraction, but not enough to ease the knot in his chest. He climbed back up the embankment, muscles burning, the mother dog watching every movement. When he reached the road, he held the bundle out slightly so she could see. Her nose pressed toward it, counting them by scent, and only then did her shoulders sag a little, as if she'd been holding herself upright by sheer force of will. "All right," Ethan said, voice rough. "All right, we're going." He turned toward the truck, and something caught his eye through the curtain of rain. Farther down the road, where the trees opened for a brief stretch, a pair of headlights appeared. Not bright, not steady. They blinked once, then dimmed, then flared again like someone was tapping the switch. Ethan's stomach tightened. The mother dog's ears went up. Her body stiffened in his arms, and a low sound rolled in her throat, deeper than fear. Ethan didn't wait to see who it was. He shoved the truck door open, set the puppies carefully on the back seat, and then, with a grunt of effort, lifted the German shepherd in after them. She was lighter than she should have been, all bone and wet fur, but she didn't fight him. She only turned her head toward the puppies and pressed her nose to the bundle again, as if making sure they were real. Ethan slammed the door, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. As he pulled back onto the road, the blinking headlights behind him grew brighter in his mirror, and he realized with a cold certainty that this night was no longer just about a storm. It was about being found, and about what, or who, might be coming next. The road narrowed as Ethan pushed the truck harder, tires hissing over standing water. He didn't look back again until the first curve swallowed the blinking headlights behind him. Even then, his shoulders stayed tight, jaw locked, eyes scanning the mirrors the way they had years ago when danger didn't always announce itself. In the back seat, the German shepherd shifted, claws scraping softly against the vinyl. She curled herself around the bundle of his jacket, nose pressed close, breathing hard but steadying as the truck climbed higher into the hills. Every few seconds, she lifted her head, ears angling toward the rear window, then lowered it again, reassured only when she could feel the small movements beneath her chest. Ethan swallowed. "You're okay," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. "We're getting out of this." The storm followed them like a living thing. Wind shoved rain sideways, rattling branches that arched over the road like grasping hands. Fog pooled in the low places, thick enough to make the headlights feel weak and distant. Ethan kept the speed just under reckless, riding the line between caution and the knowledge that stopping out here would be worse. He tried not to think about the SUV, tried to tell himself it was nothing. Someone else caught in the storm, someone turning around or pulling over. But the way the lights had blinked, the way they'd stayed back instead of passing, had scratched at the back of his mind. His gaze dropped to the rearview mirror again. Nothing now but rain and darkness. The German shepherd let out a low, strained whine. Ethan glanced back at her. "Hey," he said more gently. "I see them. They're still there." As if she understood, she leaned forward and nudged the jacket bundle with her nose, then looked at him again. Her eyes were glassy with pain and exhaustion, but there was an intensity there that made Ethan straighten without realizing it. He'd seen that look before, on men who were running on nothing but will. "You're doing good," he murmured. "Hang on." The first faint lights of Charleston appeared nearly 20 minutes later, blurred halos through the rain. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Streetlights, intersections, other vehicles. Civilization, thin as it was, felt like armor. He turned off the main road and followed a flickering sign for a 24-hour veterinary clinic tucked beside a closed feed store. The gravel lot was half flooded, puddles rippling under the downpour. A single light burned inside the building, steady and warm against the night. Ethan parked crooked, jumped out, and rounded the truck in one long stride. When he opened the back door, the German Shepherd tried to stand and failed, hind legs trembling. Ethan slid one arm under her chest and another beneath her hips. "I've got you," he said, voice low. "We're almost there." She weighed less than he expected, all angles and sharp lines beneath wet fur. As he lifted her, she pressed her head briefly against his shoulder, then craned her neck toward the puppies, checking them even as pain rippled through her body. Ethan carried her inside, the bell over the door chiming weakly as it swung open. Warm air washed over him, thick with the smell of disinfectant and wet fur. A woman behind the counter looked up sharply. "Oh my God," she said, already moving. "Bring her back here." Her name tag read, Megan Hart. She had her hair pulled back in a loose knot and dark circles under her eyes, the kind that came from long nights and hard cases. She took one look at the dog and the soaked bundle in Ethan's arms and didn't ask questions yet. Ethan set the German Shepherd gently on the examination table. She tried to rise again, eyes frantic, until he placed the jacket with the puppies beside her. Only then did she settle, though her muscles stayed coiled tight. "They're hypothermic," Megan said, hands quick and sure as she checked the pups one by one. "How long were they out there?" "I don't know," Ethan replied. "I found her on the road. She led me to them." Megan glanced at him, then at the dog. "She did," she said quietly. "Didn't she?" The German Shepherd watched every movement Megan made, eyes tracking her hands. When Megan reached to lift one of the puppies into a warming box, the dog growled, low, warning, not wild. "It's okay," Ethan said instantly, stepping closer. "She's helping them." The dog hesitated, then stilled when Ethan rested a hand on her neck. Megan noticed. "Stay right there," she told him. "She's guarding. That's not panic, that's training." Ethan frowned. "Training?" Megan didn't answer right away. She moved efficiently, placing the puppies under gentle heat, checking heart rates, murmuring numbers under her breath. Only when they were all settled did she turn her attention fully to the mother. "Dehydrated," she said. "Undernourished. This leg—" She touched it carefully, and the dog flinched. "Has an old fracture that never healed right, and newer damage on top of it." The German Shepherd's breathing hitched when one of the puppies squeaked. She tried to lift her head again. "Easy," Megan said softly. "I'm not taking them away." Ethan felt his hands shaking and forced them to be still. "Can she make it?" Megan met his eyes. "She's fighting. That counts for a lot." She reached for a scanner and ran it slowly along the dog's neck. The machine beeped. "Chip," Megan said, her brow furrowed as she read the screen. "Huh." Ethan leaned closer. "What?" Megan's mouth tightened. "This isn't a standard registration, it's older, And it's flagged. Flagged how? Restricted, she replied. Records locked. The word landed heavy in the small room. So she belongs to someone? Ethan asked. Megan shook her head slowly. Not in any way that's simple. She glanced at the dog again, studying the scars, the posture, the way she kept her body between the puppies and the rest of the room. She's not just a stray. The German Shepherd turned her head and fixed Ethan with that same steady look she'd given him on the roadside. Her eyes softened just a fraction when she saw him there. Ethan swallowed. She jumped into my arms, he said quietly, like she knew. Megan's expression changed then, not surprise, recognition. Then she chose you. Ethan let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in his chest for years. He reached out and brushed his fingers through the dog's wet fur. Okay, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. The German Shepherd's eyes closed for a brief second. When she opened them again, she stayed awake, watching, listening, still guarding. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the small clinic, under humming lights and the quiet whimpers of 4 newborn lives, something had shifted. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the night he'd thought was about survival was becoming something else entirely. It was becoming a promise. The clinic settled into a strange, hushed rhythm once the worst of the emergency passed. The storm still battered the building, rain drumming against the roof and windows, but inside the sounds softened. Machines humming, a distant phone ringing unanswered, the faint squeak of a warming box as it adjusted its temperature. Ethan sat on a plastic chair near the examination table, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. His jacket lay folded on the counter, soaked through and streaked with mud. He hadn't noticed the cold until now, when the adrenaline began to ebb and left him hollowed out. On the table, the German Shepherd lay on her side beneath a thin blanket. Clear fluid dripped steadily into a catheter in her foreleg. Her breathing was shallow but even. Every so often her ears twitched, and her eyes cracked open just enough to check the room. The puppies were close by, nestled together in a heated box. 4 tiny shapes, their bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The sound of their breathing, soft, fragile, seemed to anchor the air. Megan Hart moved between them with quiet efficiency. She adjusted the IV, checked the monitors, then turned to Ethan. You can relax a little, she said. They're stable, all of them. Ethan nodded, though his shoulders didn't drop. Thank you. Megan leaned back against the counter and studied him for a moment. You didn't hesitate, she said. Out there, most people would have driven on, especially in a storm like that. Ethan stared at the floor. Didn't feel like a choice. That's usually how the real ones don't, Megan replied. She glanced at the German Shepherd again. She's about 5, maybe 6. Hard to tell with what she's been through. She doesn't look that old, Ethan said. She isn't, Megan agreed. But life's been rough. Ethan shifted closer to the table. She keeps watching the pups, even half out of it. Megan nodded. Maternal instinct is strong. But this... She gestured toward the way the dog's body was angled, shielding the warming box. This is more than that. She's guarding like she's on duty. Ethan frowned. Duty? Megan hesitated, then sighed. I used to work contract vet services for K-9 units, police, military, private security. You start to see patterns. She reached for the scanner again and glanced at the screen, her mouth tightening. This chip, it's old format, military adjacent, but whoever locked the file didn't want it reopened. Why lock a dog's file? Ethan asked. Because someone didn't want questions, Megan said quietly. or because the answers were inconvenient. The German shepherd stirred, letting out a low sound in her throat when one of the puppies squeaked. Ethan stood instantly and moved closer, resting his hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he murmured. "They're right. Here." Her eyes opened fully then, dark and sharp despite the exhaustion. She looked at his hand, then up at his face, as if committing it to memory. Megan watched the exchange with interest. "You want to give her a name?" she asked. Ethan blinked. "A name?" "Temporary at least," Megan said. "It helps, for them and for us." Ethan thought for a moment. "Roxy," he said finally. "Feels right?" Megan smiled faintly. "Roxy it is." As if she recognized it, the dog's ears twitched again. She didn't move, but the tension in her body eased just a fraction. The clinic door opened then, letting in a gust of damp air and the sound of rain. A young woman stepped inside, shaking water from her coat. She froze when she saw the scene. "Oh," she said softly. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize—" "It's fine," Megan replied. "We're open." The woman pushed her hood back. She had dark hair plastered to her cheeks and a camera slung at her side. "I'm Sofia Ramirez," she said. "I was covering the storm. My car slid off the road a mile back. I saw the light." Megan nodded. "You're safe here." Sophia's gaze drifted to the table, to Roxy, then to the warming box. Her expression shifted, something like awe mixing with concern. "What happened?" Ethan hesitated. Megan glanced at him, then back at Sophia. "He brought them in from the road," she said. "Bad night to be left out." Sophia stepped closer, careful, respectful. "That dog, she looks like she's been through war." Ethan let out a short breath. "Feels like it?" Sophia met his eyes. "I'm not here to pry," she said. "But people need to see stories like this, especially tonight." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No cameras." Sophia raised her hands. "I didn't even take the lens cap off. I just—" She looked back at Roxy. "She trusted you." That landed harder than he expected. Megan cleared her throat. "The last thing these animals need is attention right now." Sophia nodded quickly. "Of course, I get it." She paused. "But if someone did this to her, if she was dumped out there, someone might come looking." Ethan's head snapped up. "Looking how?" Sophia hesitated. "Not everyone looks for the right reasons." The room fell quiet. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Megan turned back to the scanner screen. "The chip's restricted," she said, choosing her words carefully. "That's not normal, and it means someone, somewhere, still cares enough to lock the door." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "So she's not just abandoned?" "No," Ethan said slowly. "She was erased." Roxy shifted, as if the word stirred something in her. Her gaze flicked toward the door, ears angling forward. Ethan followed her look. The hallway beyond the exam room was empty. Still, a ripple of unease crept up his spine. Sophia glanced between them. "If someone wanted her gone," she said, quietly, "posting her online could be an invitation?" Ethan nodded once. "Then we don't post anything." Megan studied him. "You thinking of taking her with you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at Roxy, at the puppies, at the way her body curved protectively around them even now. "I won't leave her," he said at last. "Not tonight. Not after that." Megan's expression softened. "Good." Sophia took a step back. "I'll leave you to it," she said. "But if you need anything, rides, supplies—" "Thank you," Ethan said. Really. When the door closed behind her, the clinic felt smaller, quieter. Megan finished her checks and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the softer glow near the table. "You should try to rest," she told Ethan. "It's going to be a long night." Ethan leaned back in his chair but kept his eyes on Roxy. She watched him, too, as if measuring his resolve. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, under humming lights and fragile breaths, a bond was forming that neither of them yet understood. But both of them felt it. Morning came quietly, as if the storm had spent everything it had during the night and had nothing left to give. By the time gray light seeped through the clinic windows, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, tapping gently against the glass. The air inside smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur, and the hum of machines felt almost comforting in its constancy. Ethan hadn't slept. Not really. He'd dozed in fragments, his head dropping forward before jerking awake again at the smallest sound. Every time one of the puppies squeaked, his eyes snapped open. Every time Roxy shifted on the table, he was on his feet before he realized he'd moved. Old habits didn't die easily. They just waited. Roxy lay still now, her breathing steadier than it had been hours earlier. The IV bag was nearly empty. Her eyes were half closed, but they followed Ethan when he moved, tracking him with quiet focus. She didn't whine anymore. She didn't tremble. Whatever pain she was in, she carried it silently. Megan Hart entered the room with a cup of coffee in each hand. She set one down beside Ethan. "You look like hell," she said without malice. Ethan took the cup. "Feels about right." "She's holding," Megan said, glancing at Roxy. "Pups, too. We got lucky." Ethan wrapped his hands around the warm paper cup, breathing in the smell. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he said softly. Megan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You're probably right." She pulled the rolling stool closer to the counter and woke up the old desktop computer with a tap of the mouse. The screen flickered, then filled with lines of text. Megan typed quickly, fingers moving with practiced ease. "I called in a favor," she said. "Someone who still has access to older databases." Ethan straightened. "And?" Megan exhaled through her nose. "And it's worse than I thought." She turned the monitor slightly so Ethan could see. The screen showed a partial record, fragmented lines of information, most of it blacked out or marked unavailable. A designation code, a serial number, dates that didn't line up. "At one point," Megan said, "she was assigned to a contract K-9 program that worked alongside military units overseas. Not standard issue, not something you'd find in a normal registry." Ethan frowned. "So she served?" "Yes," Megan replied, and then something happened. She scrolled down. At the bottom of the file, a single line stood out. "Status. Transferred. Record restricted." "Transferred where?" Ethan asked. Megan shook her head. "That's the thing. There's no destination, no handler listed, no retirement note. Just gone." Ethan felt a familiar heat bloom behind his ribs. "They wiped her." Megan looked at him. "That's one way to put it." Roxy stirred at the sound of their voices. Her ears twitched. Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice without thinking. "Easy," he murmured. "You're okay." Her eyes opened fully then, dark and searching. She looked past him, toward the computer, as if she understood more than anyone wanted to admit. Megan followed Ethan's gaze. "She knows," she said quietly. "Dogs like this, they don't forget." The clinic door opened again, and Sofia Ramirez stepped inside, her hair still damp, her coat replaced by a borrowed sweatshirt that hung a little too loose. She held a paper bag in one hand. "I brought breakfast," she said, lifting it slightly. "Figured no one here had eaten." Megan accepted it with a tired smile. "You figured right." Sophia's eyes went to Roxy, then to the puppies. "How are they?" "Stable," Megan said. "For now." Sophia nodded, relief flickering across her face. Then she noticed the tension in the room, the way Ethan stood rigid beside the table, the way Megan's jaw was set. "What did you find?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Megan answered for him. "Her records were deliberately restricted. This wasn't an accident." Sophia's expression hardened. "So someone wanted her to disappear?" "Yes," Ethan said, "and judging by last night, they didn't just want her gone. They wanted the pups too." Sophia set the bag down slowly. "That changes things." Ethan turned toward her. "How?" "It means whatever she was involved in didn't end with her," Sophia replied. "And it means whoever erased her file didn't expect her to survive." The words settled heavily in the air. Roxy let out a low sound, not quite a growl, but close. Her body tensed, muscles tightening beneath the blanket. She turned her head toward the door, ears forward. Ethan followed her gaze instinctively. The hallway was empty. Still, his pulse picked up. "She's alerting," Megan said, "but I don't hear anything." Sophia glanced at the window, then back at Ethan. "You said there was a vehicle on the road last night." "Yes," Ethan replied. "An SUV. Dark. Didn't pass. Just watched." Megan's mouth tightened. "Then you shouldn't stay here longer than necessary." Ethan looked down at Roxy. "I'm not leaving her." "I didn't mean that," Megan said gently. "I mean you should get her somewhere private, somewhere quiet." Sophia nodded. "And off the radar." Ethan thought of his trailer near the forest. No neighbors close by. No cameras, no traffic. He'd gone there to be alone, to disappear in his own way. "I can take her," he said slowly. "And the pups." Megan met his eyes. "You understand what you're stepping into?" Ethan nodded. "I've been stepping into worse my whole life." Roxy shifted, stretching her neck toward him. He placed a hand on her head, feeling the warmth there now, the steadier rhythm of her breath. "She chose you," Sophia said softly. "Whatever that means." Ethan looked at her. "It means I don't get to walk away." Megan reached for a clipboard. "I'll discharge her with strict instructions," she said. "She needs rest, antibiotics, minimal movement. That leg won't take much more abuse." "I'll take care of her," Ethan said. "I believe you," Megan replied. As Megan prepared the paperwork, Sophia lingered near the table. "If you need anything," she said to Ethan, "supplies, help, connections, call me. Just don't put her online. Not yet." Ethan nodded. "I won't." Roxy's eyes never left him as he signed the forms. When he finished, he rested the pen on the counter and exhaled slowly. Outside, the drizzle had thinned to mist. The storm had passed. But Ethan knew better than to believe the danger had gone with it. Some things didn't end when the rain stopped. Some things were just getting started. The trailer sat back from the road, tucked into a bend of trees where the forest pressed close on all sides. Morning mist drifted low across the clearing, softening the edges of everything it touched. To someone passing by, it would have looked empty. Quiet, forgettable, the kind of place no one paid attention to. That was exactly why Ethan had chosen it. He parked beside the steps and cut the engine. For a moment, he stayed where he was, listening. No other vehicles, no voices, just wind in the branches and the distant call of a crow somewhere deeper in the woods. In the back seat, Roxy shifted, alert despite the pain that still ran through her leg. Her ears angled forward as Ethan opened the door. She didn't try to jump down. She waited. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "One thing at a time." He carried the puppies in first, setting them gently into a cardboard box he'd lined with towels and an old flannel shirt. He placed the box near the small wood stove, where the heat would stay steady. Only then did he return for Roxy. She leaned into him as he lifted her, heavier now than she'd been at the roadside, as if life had begun to settle back into her bones. Inside, the trailer smelled faintly of pine cleaner and cold iron. Ethan laid her down on a folded blanket he'd spread near the fire. Roxy's eyes never left the puppy's. Ethan moved carefully, keeping his voice low, his movements deliberate. He filled a bowl with water and held it to her mouth. She drank slowly, pausing between swallows, her body still tense until he slid the bowl closer to the pups. "That's it," he murmured. "They're right here." Only then did she ease onto her side, chest rising and falling with a deeper rhythm. One of the puppies squeaked, and she nudged the box with her nose, counting them again. Ethan sank onto the floor nearby, back against the wall. He closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them again, the light had shifted. Late morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long bands of gold across the trailer floor. The storm felt far away now, like something that had happened to someone else. Roxy stirred when Ethan stood and went to the small bathroom. He filled a basin with warm water, grabbed a rag, and returned to her side. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's get you cleaned up." She watched him closely as he wrung out the cloth. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched at first, then held still. Ethan moved slowly, wiping away dried mud and blood, revealing the coat beneath. Black and tan, dulled by neglect but still thick. As he cleaned around her neck, his fingers brushed something hard beneath the fur. Not bone, not scar tissue. Ethan paused. Roxy's ears twitched, her eyes sharpened. "It's okay," he said instinctively. "I'm not hurting you." He pushed the fur aside gently and felt it again. A small, flat shape tucked beneath a strip of worn fabric that looked like it had once been part of a collar. The stitching was crude, done by hand. Ethan's breath caught. Carefully, he worked the fabric loose, exposing a thin piece of metal, dulled with age and wear. It was no bigger than his thumb, the edges smooth from being carried a long time. He lifted it into the light. Engraved into the surface were a few simple words. CPL. Noah Bennett. Ethan stared at the name, his pulse thudding in his ears. "Noah," he whispered. Roxy's head lifted, her eyes fixed on the tag, her body going rigid. She let out a low sound, not a growl, not a whine, something deeper, older. Her breathing quickened. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd heard that name before, years ago. Not in person, not face to face, but through the loose threads of military talk that never quite went away. A handler attached to a special unit. A mission that had gone quiet. A man who hadn't come home. "You carried this," Ethan said softly, more statement than question. Roxy's gaze shifted from the tag to his face. For a long moment they looked at each other, the space between them filled with something neither could name. Then she lowered her head again, resting it on the blanket, eyes still open. Ethan sat back on his heels, the tag heavy in his palm. "You didn't leave him," he murmured. "Did you?" Memory stirred in him then, unbidden, the sound of rotor blades, the metallic taste of dust, a voice over the radio calling a name that never answered back. He shook his head, forcing the images away. The puppies squeaked again, pulling him back. Ethan tucked the tag into his pocket for the moment and returned to cleaning Roxy, gentler now, as if every touch might bruise something unseen. By afternoon, she was resting more easily. The puppies slept in a warm tangle, bellies rising and falling in unison. Ethan stepped outside to split a little wood, keeping one eye on the tree line the whole time. When he came back in, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "You good? Just checking in." Ethan typed back with stiff fingers. "We're safe. For now." A pause. Then, "I did some digging. Quietly. The name you mentioned last night. Bennett, that trail goes cold fast, like someone froze it. Ethan stared at the screen. Anything else? He typed. Enough to know you were right to keep her hidden, Sophia replied. If someone comes asking questions, it won't be friendly. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked down at Roxy. Seems like you brought more than trouble home, he said quietly. Roxy's eyes flicked towards the door, then back to the puppies. She shifted, placing her body between them and the rest of the room, even in sleep. Ethan reached into his pocket and took out the tag again. He turned it over, tracing the letters with his thumb. You held on to this, he said, all this time. The sun dipped lower, light fading into amber. The forest grew still, holding its breath. Ethan looped a piece of twine through the hole in the tag and tied it loosely around Roxy's neck, resting it against her fur where it had been before. She didn't resist. If anything, she seemed to settle more deeply, as if something had been put back where it belonged. Outside, a vehicle passed on the distant road, tires hissing on wet pavement. Roxy's ears twitched, but she didn't rise. Ethan sat beside her until the light faded completely, the weight of the name in his mind, and the quiet promise of what lay ahead pressing down on him. Whatever had been erased, whatever someone had tried to bury, it hadn't stayed buried. And now that he knew the name, Ethan understood one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about finishing a story that had been left unfinished. Night returned without ceremony. There was no storm this time, no thunder to announce its arrival. Just a steady, uneasy quiet that settled over the forest like a held breath. The trailer sat dark beneath the trees, a single lamp glowing low inside, its light softened by the curtains Ethan had pulled tight before dusk. He'd learned to do that overseas. No silhouettes, no invitations. Roxy lay on her side near the stove, the puppies tucked close against her belly. Her breathing was slow, measured, but she wasn't asleep. Ethan could tell by the way her ears shifted at every sound outside. A branch snapping, a distant owl, the low sigh of wind moving through pine needles. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, cleaning an old flashlight with a rag. His phone lay face down beside it. He hadn't turned on the television. Noise felt wrong tonight. The puppies stirred, one of them letting out a soft, thin squeak. Roxy's head lifted instantly. I hear them, Ethan said quietly. You don't have to worry. She didn't relax. Neither did he. It happened just after midnight. A sound so small it barely registered at first. A faint click, metal against wood. Ethan's head came up, muscles tightening before his mind caught up. Roxy was already moving, her body stiff, ears pinned forward, a low vibration rolling through her chest. Another sound followed. A soft scrape near the back door. Ethan stood slowly, careful not to make noise. He reached for the flashlight and eased it into his hand, keeping it off. His heart thudded, steady and controlled. This wasn't panic. This was recognition. Someone was there. The back door creaked, just enough to let in a thread of cold air. A shadow slipped through the crack, then another. Dark shapes against darker walls. Roxy rose without a sound, placing herself squarely between the puppies and the intruders. Her injured leg trembled, but she didn't falter. The flashlight flicked on. A narrow beam swept the room, cutting across the wall, the table, the stove, then landed on the cardboard box near the fire. There, one of the men whispered. Grab it. They weren't burglars. They didn't look around for valuables. They didn't hesitate. They moved with purpose. Ethan took a step forward, raising the flashlight. Get out, he said, voice sharp and clear. The men froze for half a second. Roxy lunged. She didn't bark. She didn't snarl. She hit the first man low and hard, shoulder driving into his knees with a force that sent him crashing into the table. The lamp tipped, shattered, sparks flaring as glass hit the floor. The second man shouted and swung something that crackled blue in the dark. A stun rod. The arc caught Roxy along her injured leg. She yelped, a sound torn from deep in her chest, and stumbled. Ethan moved, adrenaline flooding his limbs. "Roxy!" But she didn't retreat. She turned with terrifying precision, jaws snapping shut around the man's forearm. He screamed, dropping the rod as blood bloomed dark against his jacket. Roxy held fast, teeth locked, eyes blazing. The first man staggered to his feet, panic flashing across his face. He lunged toward the box, grabbed the smallest puppy, and bolted for the back door. "No!" Ethan shouted. He chased them into the night. Cold air slammed into him as he burst outside. The forest swallowed the light, trees closing in like walls. Snowmelt and mud slicked the ground, and Ethan nearly went down as he rounded the corner of the trailer. Ahead, the kidnapper crashed through brush, clutching the puppy tight against his chest. The pup's cries cut through the dark, thin and desperate. Behind Ethan, Roxy followed. Her limp was pronounced now, each step a visible effort, but she didn't slow. She ran past Ethan, nose low, tracking, breath steaming in sharp bursts. "Roxy, stay back!" Ethan yelled. She didn't. The man slipped on a patch of wet leaves and went down hard near the tree line. The puppy tumbled free, rolling in the mud. Roxy hit him a heartbeat later. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. She planted herself over the puppy, teeth bared, body shaking with effort and rage. Snow and dirt clung to her fur, melting into dark streaks. Her chest heaved, blood dripping from her muzzle where she'd been struck earlier. Ethan reached them seconds later, hauling the man up by his collar and slamming him against a tree. The kidnapper groaned, hands weakly raised. "Don't move," Ethan said coldly. A flashlight beam cut through the woods from the opposite direction. "Ethan!" a voice shouted. "You all right?" It was a familiar voice, gravelly, steady. Tom Weaver, Ethan's nearest neighbor, came barreling through the trees with a shotgun slung low and a flashlight in his free hand. His eyes took in the scene in an instant. "Holy hell," Tom breathed. "What in God's name?" "Help me tie them," Ethan said. "They came for the dog, for the puppies." Tom didn't ask questions. He pulled zip ties from his jacket pocket and moved with the efficiency of a man who'd spent years in the woods dealing with worse. They bound both intruders and dragged them into the clearing as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called it in, maybe Tom's wife when she heard the commotion. Roxy stood over the recovered puppy, refusing to let go until Ethan knelt beside her. "You did it," he said softly, hands gentle as he took the pup from beneath her chest. "You did good." Her body trembled, exhaustion finally breaking through the adrenaline. Blood seeped through the bandage on her leg. She leaned into Ethan's knee, breath ragged. The puppy whimpered, then settled when Ethan tucked it close. Red and blue lights washed over the trees as a sheriff's cruiser skidded to a stop. Deputy Claire Morgan stepped out, tall and wiry, eyes sharp even in the chaos. "What happened?" she demanded. Ethan answered evenly. "They broke in, tried to steal one of the pups." Claire crouched beside Roxy, her expression softening despite the blood and mud. "That leg looks bad." "She's been through worse," Ethan said. Claire looked up at him. "She trained?" "Yes," he replied. "Once." Claire nodded slowly. "Then it makes sense." Paramedics took the intruders away, their faces tight with anger and defeat. The forest grew quiet again, broken only by Roxy's labored breathing and the distant hum of engines pulling away. Ethan carried her back inside, laying her down beside the puppies. She curled around them instantly, guarding even in pain. He sat beside her on the floor, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "They came for you," he whispered. "And you still stood your ground." Roxy's eyes met his, steady despite the fatigue. Outside, the forest settled back into silence. But Ethan knew now, without a shred of doubt, that this was no longer just a rescue. It was a fight. And Roxy had already chosen her side. The morning after the break-in felt unnaturally still. A pale sun climbed over the trees, laying thin light across the clearing as if nothing violent had happened there hours before. The forest looked clean again, rinsed by night air and dew. Only the torn patch of earth near the tree line, still dark with churned mud, hinted at what had passed. Inside the trailer, Roxy lay stretched on her side, her injured leg newly wrapped in fresh bandages. The puppies were pressed close, their small bodies warm and alive, their soft sounds filling the space with a fragile sense of normalcy. She kept her head lifted just enough to see them all, eyes heavy but watchful. Ethan sat on the floor beside her, his back against the cabinet, exhaustion finally catching up. His arms were bruised, his hands still smelled faintly of metal and dirt no matter how many times he washed them. He hadn't slept, but his body had stopped demanding it. Right now, being awake felt necessary. Deputy Claire Morgan had left just after dawn, promising to return later with updates. The men who'd broken in hadn't said much. Professional. Careful. Not locals. That detail sat heavy in Ethan's chest. He was refilling Roxy's water bowl when a vehicle rolled slowly into the clearing. Not Tom's old truck. This one moved with quiet deliberation, tires crunching softly over gravel. Ethan's spine stiffened. Roxy felt it immediately, her ears lifted, her body tensed, muscles gathering beneath her fur despite the pain. "Easy," Ethan murmured, moving closer. He stood, careful not to startle her, and stepped out onto the porch. The car stopped a few yards away. The engine cut. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair silvered and cropped short. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, but the way he stood, straight-backed, composed, marked him unmistakably. Military, through and through. He didn't advance. He stopped where he was, hands visible, eyes taking in the trailer, the woods, the quiet. "Ethan Cole?" he called. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the man carefully, measuring him the way he'd learned to measure threats years ago. Something in the man's posture gave him pause. Not aggression. Not curiosity. Grief. "That's me," Ethan said at last. The man nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "My name is Daniel Bennett," he said. "Master Gunnery Sergeant, retired." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Bennett. He felt his throat tighten. "What do you want?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Daniel Bennett reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out an envelope, worn at the edges. He held it up, not opening it yet. "I'm looking for a dog," he said quietly. "A German Shepherd, answers to the name Roxy." Behind Ethan, the screen door creaked softly. Roxy had dragged herself to her feet. She stood just inside the doorway, weight shifted off her injured leg, eyes locked on the man in the clearing. Daniel Bennett saw her then. For a moment, his composure cracked, his breath caught, sharp and sudden, as if something had punched the air from his lungs. "So it's true," he whispered. "You're alive." Roxy took one step forward, then another, stopping at the threshold. She studied him the way she studied everything, carefully, thoroughly. Her ears flicked, her nose lifting to taste the air. Ethan glanced back at her, then returned his gaze to Bennett. "You knew her," he said. Daniel nodded slowly. "My son did." The words settled into the quiet like a weight. "Noah Bennett," Daniel continued. "Corporal, K-9 handler." His voice stayed steady by force alone. She was his partner. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the forest looked sharper, as if the truth had pulled everything into focus. "I found this," he said, reaching into his pocket. He stepped down from the porch and held out the small metal tag. Daniel took it with trembling hands. When he saw the name engraved there, his shoulders sagged, and the breath he released sounded like it had been trapped in him for years. "She carried it," Ethan said, "all this time." Daniel nodded, eyes fixed on the tag. "Noah wrote to me," he said quietly. "Every chance he got. He talked about her more than himself. Said she watched his back better than anyone ever had." Roxy moved then. She stepped fully onto the porch, ignoring the pain in her leg, and walked toward Daniel with measured, deliberate steps. She stopped in front of him and lifted her head. Daniel froze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Roxy leaned forward and pressed her head gently into his chest. The sound Daniel made wasn't quite a sob, but it came close. He dropped to one knee, one hand shaking as it came to rest on her neck. His fingers brushed the scars beneath her fur, and his face crumpled. "You stayed with him," he whispered. "Didn't you?" Ethan looked away, giving them space. Daniel gathered himself slowly, resting his forehead against Roxy's for a brief, private moment. When he stood again, his eyes were wet but clear. "They told me she was gone," he said to Ethan. "Declared lost in the same report that listed my son as killed in action. No remains, no explanation, just a sealed file." Roxy stepped back then, returning to Ethan's side, her presence solid and grounding. "She never left him," Ethan said softly. "I can see it." Daniel nodded. "That's what Noah said he feared most," he replied. "Being forgotten, leaving someone behind." He looked at the trailer, at the woods, at the quiet life Ethan had built here. "They came for her," he said, not asking. "Yes," Ethan answered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then you're right to keep her close." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a folded letter. "This is the last thing Noah sent me," he said. "I think it belongs with her now." Ethan took the letter carefully. He didn't open it. Some things deserved to remain sacred. Daniel looked at Roxy one last time. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing her home, and for not letting her be erased." Ethan met his gaze. "She saved herself," he said. "I just stayed." Daniel nodded, understanding passing between them without need for more words. When Daniel Bennett drove away, the forest swallowed the sound of his car quickly, leaving behind only birdsong and the soft rustle of leaves. Inside the trailer, Ethan knelt beside Roxy, resting his forehead briefly against hers. "He never left you," he murmured, "and you never left him." Roxy exhaled slowly, her body finally easing. For the first time since Ethan had found her on that road, she slept. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, as if the land itself was cautious after everything it had seen. Snow retreated in patches, leaving the ground dark and rich beneath. Buds appeared on the trees one quiet morning, unnoticed until suddenly they were everywhere. The forest softened, the air warmed, and life, stubborn and patient, began again. Roxy healed the same way. Her leg took time, weeks of rest, careful steps. Bandages changed with steady hands and quiet reassurance. Some mornings she favored it more than others, but she never complained. She simply adjusted, carrying herself with the same quiet discipline that had defined her from the beginning. The puppies grew fast. They tumbled over one another in clumsy bursts of energy, discovering their legs, their voices, the joy of movement. Ethan named them one by one as their personalities emerged. Scout, the boldest, Ash, thoughtful and observant, Willow, gentle but stubborn, and Ridge, who followed Roxy everywhere like a shadow. Roxy watched them constantly. She didn't hover. She trained. A nudge here, a sharp look there, a low sound in her throat when they strayed too far. She corrected them with precision, teaching boundaries and trust, patience and restraint. Ethan saw it clearly now. This wasn't instinct alone. This was experience. Ethan's life shifted around them without him quite noticing when it happened. He stopped driving into town unless he needed supplies. He fixed up the old fence line behind the trailer, reinforcing it, extending it. He built a small shelter near the tree line, then another. When Sophia came by one afternoon with bags of dog food and a borrowed camera, he almost told her no. Almost. But she didn't film Roxy's face. She didn't show the location. She focused instead on Ethan's hands as he worked, on the puppies chasing leaves, on the quiet rhythm of life returning. "This isn't about exposing anything," she told him. "It's about honoring it." The story ran without names, without addresses, just a former Marine, a war dog, and the promise they'd made to each other. It spread quietly, respectfully, and with it came calls, messages, veterans asking questions, shelters asking for help. Ethan listened. He didn't answer all of them, but he answered enough. Deputy Claire Morgan stopped by one evening with updates. The men who'd broken in had been connected to a private security firm with government contracts. Nothing official would ever be said, but the message was clear enough. "They won't bother you again," Claire said. "Too many eyes now." Ethan nodded. "Good." Roxy sat beside him on the porch, her head high, gaze sweeping the clearing. She didn't relax until Claire's cruiser disappeared down the road. A month later, Daniel Bennett returned. This time he didn't come alone. He brought a small wooden box, polished smooth by age and care. Inside lay his son's dog tags, the metal worn soft around the edges. "I want her to have these," Daniel said, his voice steady. "She carried him home in every way that mattered." Ethan hesitated. "Are you sure?" Daniel smiled faintly. "She earned them." Ethan knelt and slipped the chain gently around Roxy's neck. The tags rested against her chest, cool and solid. She looked up at him once, amber eyes calm, then turned toward the mountains as if acknowledging something only she could see. Daniel stayed for coffee, for quiet, for remembrance. When he left, there was no heaviness in his step, just a sense of something finally set right. By summer, the clearing behind Ethan's trailer no longer felt like a place meant to be forgotten. Wooden posts marked new enclosures. A hand-painted sign hung near the drive, simple and unassuming. Haven. No last name. No explanation. Veterans came on weekends, some with their own scars, some carrying stories they didn't yet know how to tell. They worked alongside Ethan, mending fences, training dogs, sharing meals. No one asked for details. They didn't need to. Roxy watched over all of it. She lay near the entrance most days, her posture relaxed but alert, eyes tracking every movement. The puppies, no longer puppies now, ran drills, learned commands, failed, and tried again. When they faltered, Roxy corrected them. When they succeeded, she allowed herself the smallest flick of her tail. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and rust, Ethan sat on the porch steps beside her. "When I found you," he said quietly, "I thought you were the one who needed saving." Roxy shifted, leaning her weight against his leg. "I was wrong," he continued. You brought me back. She turned her head slightly, resting it against his knee. Her breathing was slow, steady, content. The world beyond the clearing kept moving. News cycles changed. Storms came and went. But here, something held. That night, Ethan walked the perimeter before turning in. The woods were alive with sound. Crickets, frogs, the distant call of an owl. When he returned, Roxy was already settled near the door, her body positioned just so, the way it always was. He paused, watching her for a moment. No one gets left behind, he said softly. Roxy's ears twitched. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Inside, the puppies slept. Outside, the mountain stood silent and sure. And in the space between what had been lost and what had been found, a promise held firm. Some stories ended with rescue. This one ended with belonging. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, even for a moment, then it did what it was meant to do. Now I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever stopped for someone, or something, when it would have been easier to walk away? Or have you ever been the one hoping someone would stay? Tell us in the comments. Just a few words is enough. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If you believe no one, two-legged or four, should ever be left behind, tap the like button so this story can reach a little farther. And if you want to keep hearing real stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are more stories waiting. And the next one might find you exactly when you need it. Thank you for being here.